You're sworn to the Constitution, not the president. Those words hit differently when aimed at an attorney general who just refused to answer whether January 6th pardons cover unrelated crimes. What you're about to see is Congressman Joe Morelle pressing Pam Bondi on a question that goes to the heart of law enforcement, independence, and her evasive response that reveals everything about how justice works when loyalty trumps law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Meng for holding this important hearing, and thank you, Attorney General Bondi, for appearing before us today. Madam Attorney General, I serve, in addition to the Appropriations Committee, as a ranking member of the Committee on House Administration. I sent you a letter last week, along with my Republican counterpart, Chairman Brian Stile, requesting an increase in federal prosecutory resources to address threats against members of Congress, particularly in light of what happened last week in Minnesota, that tragedy. In 2024, the U.S. Capitol Police identified and received nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats against members. Federal prosecutors have only secured 8 convictions so far, and the heightened threat environment demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Will you commit to assigning an assistant U.S. attorney or a special assistant U.S. attorney in each of the 94 federal districts to, at least on a part-time basis, investigate and prosecute threats against members of Congress?
So thank you for bringing that up, and I take that very seriously. Not only what happened in Minnesota was horrible. I've spoken to Keith Ellison. I've spoken to Amy Klobuchar about that. It's horrible. We are involved in that. The FBI was involved. Our U.S. attorneys are involved. Many of these are district to district. So the way we're doing that is, I will tell you, my National Security Division is involved in all of those and assisting in those. We meet every single morning and we discuss that. But many of those, Minnesota, will be handled in the state in which it happened. Another one is
So, may
Governor, I'm sorry if I can keep going. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't mean
Quickly,
to.
though.
I filibuster. Governor Shapiro and what happened in Pennsylvania with Governor Shapiro. I've spoken to Governor Shapiro. We are working hand in hand, our U.S. attorney with the district attorney there, hand in hand, just like in Minnesota. I made sure our U.S. attorney and our district attorneys there were working hand in hand. Political party doesn't matter when something like this happens. And I also want to make sure all members of Congress are safe as well.
Okay, and I would reiterate, Chairman Stile and I think Chairman Stile and I agree that at least a part-time in each of the 94 districts would be appropriate. Let me change topics for just a moment. I'm
Really
sorry.
quick on that. Yes, we're doing that through our National Security Division, so I think that's already in the works, and I would be glad to meet with you in a secure facility to talk about that.
Very good, thank you. Continuing, in addition to my role here, the committee that I serve on as an authorizer oversees Capitol security as well as federal elections, so I'm closely following the aftermath of January 6th. Recently, several defendants who received presidential pardons related to that day are now arguing in court that the pardon covers crimes like, for instance, illegal firearm possession discovered in a search of an individual's home in California months after January 6th. What's your position on whether the pardons cover these separate offenses?
The pardon power rests with the president, not the Department of Justice, and some of that is pending litigation, and I cannot discuss pending litigation.
Well, I'm not asking you about who has the right to a pardon. I think as the Department of Justice in February wrote, the pardon is an act of grace which removes the punishment from a crime a person has committed. It further said, in its effect, the granting of a pardon is in no sense the overturning of a judgment of conviction. It is an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment. So as the chief law enforcement officer, what's your opinion, not the president's power of whether he can offer a pardon? That's pretty clear in the Constitution. But for crimes committed unrelated to January 6th, would you suggest that the pardons would cover activities or crimes potentially committed outside of that by the same person?
Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the
No, I actually
commutation
referred
of
to
all
January
the
6th. I'm sorry.
all the sentences that the people that were on death row. I've met with those families.
No,
and all of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
So, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, but you swore an oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are on the extent to which pardons cover potential crimes committed by individuals who have been pardoned but unrelated to January 6th.
Do you mean the ones that were done by the auto pen? I'm not going to
All
discuss
right.
anything that
Mr.
could be
Chairman,
or not be
I
pending litigation.
respectfully, Ms. DeLauro accused you of filibustering. I think that's the height of filibustering. This is a serious, serious topic. And for you to suggest that you don't have an opinion or to divert to other things that have nothing to do with January 6 pardons, I think is frankly demeaning to your responsibilities and your job. With that, I'll yield back.
What Congressman Joe Morelle did in that exchange was more than questioning. It was a masterclass in exposing how evasion becomes complicity when law enforcement abandons its constitutional duty. He didn't just ask about pardon. He constructed a legal trap that forced Bondi to choose between honest answers and political loyalty, and her choice revealed everything about what happens when the Department of Justice becomes a shield for power instead of a sword for justice. The core issue Morelle raised cuts to the foundation of constitutional law. When a president issues a pardon for specific crimes, does that pardon extend to cover completely unrelated criminal activity by the same person? This isn't academic hair-splitting. It's about whether presidential clemency becomes a blanket immunity that transforms law enforcement into political theater. Morelle cited the department's own legal position that a pardon removes punishment for crimes committed, but doesn't overturn the conviction itself. More critically, it doesn't create a legal force field around the individual for future or unrelated criminal activity. Bondi's response pattern was textbook deflection. First, she invoked the separation of powers, claiming she couldn't discuss the president's pardon authority. But Morelle wasn't questioning that authority. He was asking about the scope and limits of pardons as they affect ongoing law enforcement. When that deflection failed, she pivoted to Hunter Biden and death row commutations. Classic whataboutism that avoids the actual question. Finally, she claimed pending litigation prevented comment, despite the fact that legal principles about pardon scope are well-established doctrine, not case-specific secrets. This evasion matters because it reveals a fundamental corruption of the Attorney General's role. The position exists precisely to provide independent legal judgment, even when that judgment conflicts with political preferences. When Morelle said, "You're sworn to the Constitution, not the President," he was reminding Bondi of a basic principle that distinguishes law enforcement from political advocacy. An Attorney General who cannot articulate legal boundaries around presidential power is an Attorney General who has already ceded the independence that makes the rule of law possible. The practical consequences of Bondi's non-answers extend far beyond this hearing room. If January 6th pardons are interpreted broadly to cover unrelated crimes, you create a precedent where presidential clemency becomes a tool for comprehensive legal immunity. This transforms the pardon power from an act of mercy for specific offenses into a mechanism for placing individuals above the law entirely. Career prosecutors watching this exchange understand the message: don't pursue cases against politically connected defendants because pardons can retroactively nullify your work and protect future crimes. Morelle's frustration was warranted because Bondi's evasions weren't just unhelpful, they were dangers. When the chief law enforcement officer refuses to articulate basic legal principles about the limits of executive power, she's not protecting institutional relationships, she's eroding them. Justice depends on predictable, consistent application of legal standards. When those standards become fluid based on political considerations, you don't have law enforcement. You have enforcement as a political weapon. The broader pattern here connects to democratic erosion in ways that extend beyond any single case or controversy. Authoritarian systems don't emerge overnight through dramatic coups. They develop gradually as institutions designed to check power instead become instruments of power. An attorney general who cannot explain legal limits on presidential pardons is participating in that erosion whether intentionally or not. What should have happened in that exchange? Bondi should have clearly stated that pardons cover only the specific crimes for which they're granted, that they don't create immunity for unrelated criminal activity, and that the department will continue investigating and prosecuting crimes regardless of an individual's pardon status for different offenses. This isn't controversial legal theory, it's basic constitutional law that protects the integrity of law enforcement. Morelle's accusation of filibustering wasn't just procedural frustration, it was recognition that deliberate evasion by law enforcement leadership undermines public confidence in equal justice. When citizens see the Attorney General refusing to answer straightforward questions about legal principles, they reasonably conclude that politics, not law, drives prosecutorial decisions. The stakes of this moment extend beyond January 6th, pardons to the fundamental question of whether law enforcement operates independently of political pressure. Bondi's performance suggests it doesn't. That's not just disappointing, it's a constitutional crisis in slow motion, one evasive answer at a time.